I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, the podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detlaff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies, and oh boy, I had a whole week to think about an extra thing to tack onto the identity. You never remember. Matt, I feel like you just have to knight me one.
Yeah, and you're also one of the VeggieTales.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay.
I've got that broccoli hair.
Hey, I'm Matt Bernico. I'm on this podcast too. And let's see. I don't want to say I'm a professor anymore. I want to say I'm a member of the power team, and I'm coming to your hometown, and I'm going to rip a phone book in half with the power of Christ.
Wow, I really got shortchanged with the VeggieTales, but that's okay. It's my own fault.
You're the tomato, so if that makes it any different for you, maybe.
That short, crabby tomato.
Yeah, cool. Hey, well, this week we've got a lot of cool stuff going on. We're still riding out that evangelicalism wave, and we're going to be talking about a really neat book called To Serve God in Wal-Mart, The Making of Christian Free Enterprise. That's by Bethany Moreton. But before we do, we got to just do all of our good housekeeping stuff. We got to clean this house right up.
It gets dirty so fast. Yeah,
that's right. So first things first, thanks for all of the good Patreon support we've been getting lately. It's been just wild and great and fantastic. So we thank you all for giving us a little bit of your cash. It's been awesome. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/the Magnificast and you can support us there. Yeah, cool. The different tiers get you access to a little bit different content. Right now, Dean and I are pretty busy, so the content is a little on the thin side, I suppose, but that'll turn around soon, I think. Cool. If you can't do that, you can always give us a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes, search the Magnificast, give us a nice 5 out of 5 stars. Tell us a little something about yourself, and just say something uplifting, empowering. We don't need any more negativity in the world. That's all I'm trying to say.
I think you're right. Just the right kind of negativity, the right kinds of antagonisms.
Towards people who deserve it, not us.
That's right. Matt, I hear you've also been busy, once again, down in the old Reddit mines.
You heard right. I've been down there all day.
Spelunking.
Just kidding. I've not been down there all day. That would be so sad. Yeah, so I went down the old Reddit mines. I checked out what's going on there. I looked to see what Christians had tough problems that they need our help with. So I found a good one, and I'm here, Dean, to ask it to you. So yep. I hope you're ready for this one.
I'm ready. I've been studying all day.
Okay. This is it's a year old, so I hope this person is still okay. Should have gotten this one sooner. All right, so this post is called Computer Games. Don't you guys got sometimes feeling that playing computer games for 24/7 is kind of sin? I got a friend who give up on everything, family, school, and friends, because all he wants to do is play computer games. So, Dean, what do you think about this eloquently written post here? Is playing computer games for 24/7, is that kind of sin?
I think it is kind of sin. Last week I set up the precedent that it's a sin if I can't imagine Jesus doing it, and it is not a sin if I can imagine Jesus doing it, and I can't imagine Jesus spending 24 hours 7 days a week playing computer games.
Okay, but here's the other test that we did come up with. Could you imagine Paul doing it? Jesus, maybe not, but Paul was historically the church's first gamer.
Well, yeah, but he's also chief among sinners, so.
Right. That does make sense.
It's like, here's the thing. I can imagine Jesus going to a party of gamers, a party of sinners, if you will, all playing games 24/7. And I can even imagine him like turning water into Mountain Dew for them, just by his own good graces, or like, multiplying Cheetos so that everybody gets enough. But I can't imagine him sitting down and partaking himself.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I do understand what you're saying. Because he would be amongst the sinners. No, I get that. Okay, someone else has said, I would argue from a Christian point of view, praying 24/7 is rather sinful as well, because it means you're not helping people. What do you think about that one?
Yeah. The thing is, I can't imagine Paul doing that because he says you should pray without ceasing.
Right.
Which I think is 24/7. So I think this person's got their wires crossed.
Okay, let me throw you a quick hypothetical, and you can tell me what you think if this changes your opinion any. So you're playing Fortnite. You're in your group of Fortnite friends. Your KD is through the roof. I don't know if that's good or bad. I can never really remember. Your KD is exactly where it should be, I guess. And you are going to shoot people. You're going to play the game right. You're going to win because you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. But while you're playing the game, you're also on that voice chat, and you're just reading your favorite Bible verses. You're proselytizing to everyone else in the game. You're saying, you're asking them, how's your heart? Or, are you guarding your heart? Asking lots of questions about people's hearts, I think, is kind of the key here. So what if that's what you do?
The thing is, if that's the case, then you're not playing a game 24/7. Then that's work. You're going to work. It's a completely different category.
Yeah, right. That is true. Okay. I think we nailed that one. I think it's good.
I think we nailed it.
Don't play video games 24/7. It is kind of sin.
It is kind of sin.
And if you do proselytize people on Fortnite, you should ask your pastor to pay you because it's work.
Yeah, or play it 27 and then just work the other 4. That should be fine.
And on Sunday, rest from that. The Sundays are for Minecraft because it's very relaxing.
Yeah, 24/7 Minecraft on a Sunday. So I guess just 24/1. That would be fine.
Right. Yeah. You could just be mining and making swords and stuff, but not, killing monsters. Okay, cool. Well, we did it. We did that question, and now that people know the answer to it.
We did it. I hope that helps you out. All right, let's turn to some actual things that might help you wrap your brain around evangelicals. It's tough stuff to do. So we've tried to do a little bit of it for you. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about evangelicals and how they think and what makes them politically important and why Christian Marxists might have a thing or two to say about how some certain evangelical ways of thinking about politics shape our world and shape some popular authors and activists and that sort of thing. This week, though, we decided to take kind of a weird angle on evangelicalism by looking at this book that Matt mentioned earlier called To Serve God in Wal-Mart. The Making of Christian Free Enterprise by Bethany Moreton. In the book, Moreton traces how evangelicalism and Wal-Mart, the store, go hand in hand, and she reveals some really interesting links between the class interests of people like the Waltons and the history of conservative Christianity in particular. One of the most interesting themes that emerges is a story about the Waltons and Christianity, but also anti-communism. In the first episode, if you remember in this arc way back a few weeks ago in Evangelicalism, we mentioned that anti-communism was a really interesting piece of the Netflix documentary The Family, but it kind of gets underexplored, underdeveloped in that story. So the documentary tells a story of the rise of a strong kind of Christianity in the face of a growing labor movement. So you don't want a Christianity that could be for the unwashed masses, or, you know, all these people that the Marxists are trying to organize. Instead, you want a Christianity for the rich or something like that. Something really similar happens in this story, too, that Morton is telling. But in this story, we get, I think, some more detailed, definitely more detailed insight into how anti-communism helps define evangelical identity, especially. In fact, I think something that we're thinking about now is that maybe you can't tell the history of evangelicalism without the history of anti-communism, which is interesting for our purposes.
Yeah, I think that's a big claim, but a thesis that is, I don't know, I think it's right. Yeah, evangelicalism is a right-wing reaction, I think, to left-wing currents in Christianity. Well, we'll get to more of that later, but we should also kind of set up the book by saying that it's a window into like a weird Christian version of the Koch network or something like that. And when I say Coke, I mean like not that good brown Coca-Cola. Of course not. It's sinless, I believe.
That sweet brown stuff that'll ruin your pennies.
That's right. No, we're talking about the Koch family, the Koch brothers. You might know that one of them died very recently. If you don't know who the Kochs are, you might want to listen to the latest episode of Know Your Enemy, the podcast with Matt Sitman and Sam Adler-Bell, where they talk about the Kochs and all of their spooky, dark money they use to try to build a libertarian world. Yeah, basically, I mean, the whole idea is that this like family is extremely wealthy. They made their money in some pretty well, okay, to put it lightly, we would say suspicious ways, but they like basically sold stuff to the Nazis and to other people too. They built factories, is what I'm trying to say. They built factories for the Nazis. It's not great. Anyways, yeah, the Koch family used their dark money and their networks of power and influence to try to build like libertarian think tanks and influence culture overall. And the Waltons do something surprisingly similar. Maybe this is just a thing that rich people do. Hashtag just rich people things. The Waltons use their spooky money, though, not to build a libertarian world, but to try to turn communists into Christians in some cases and fund Christian crusades against communism in others. They also use their money and their networks of influence to help prop up an evangelicalism that prizes a service-oriented work ethic that provides them with workers and business people. I mean, the subtitle of the book, the making of Christian free enterprise, is exactly right. That's like the whole kind of idea, is they're trying to create a political economy where their goals can easily be obtained. So overall, Walmart is a big part of that story, of that big capitalist evangelical resonance machine that we talked about a few weeks back. It's a wild story. Definitely not the beginning of the story, for sure, right? Like there's a maybe even an older history that we could kind of trace out, and maybe we will in the future. But I think that this stuff here with Walmart is like, it's weird. It's a weird way in, but it's like, I think, a pretty illustrative example of the ways the idea of Christian free enterprise kind of like happens in the United States.
Yeah, I think too, just the fact that this is such a produced kind of thing is really interesting, right? Like a lot of the time on this podcast, we trace kind of accidental histories, or I don't know, like just stories of how things occurred, sort of emergently out of history or society or whatever. But one thing that always gets me really fascinated is when someone can tell a story that actually talks about how things get put together, and how different pieces of a way of looking at the world or a way of shaping the world kind of come into place, and how, most importantly, people try to reproduce that world through really specific means. So in this case, the Waltons are trying to reproduce a world where people love Walmart, but they love it for Christian reasons, which is really wild and really bizarre. And just really, I think we owe it to Bethany Moreton to have laid all this out.
Yeah. The book, by the way, I've been reading it over the last few days. It's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. If you like weird histories, this is the weirdest one. Man, I didn't know I could care so much about Walmart, and then I read this. Quick disclaimer, just letting you know, I'm not just an innocent, unpartial bystander here. I worked for Walmart for 6 months, and I gotta tell you, it's not great. It's not a great place to work. That's all I want to say about it. Everything this book says, in my experience, was true. Okay, so Bethany Moreton starts the book out just kind of like explaining like the weird phenomena that is Walmart. Man, I imagine if you're not a person in the United States, this episode will probably be kind of weird. But Walmart is this huge like cultural force. It's like a giant store with everything you'd never ever want in it, but it's all there just the same. And
Can I actually maybe I can give an anecdote that illustrates how bizarre Walmart is?
Absolutely.
So I am from an extremely small rural town in Michigan, in northern Michigan, and there's nothing there. There's not even a single thing. And there is, however, one Walmart. And when I was like a teenager, the thing to do if you didn't have any time, or like if you didn't have anything to do and you wanted to hang out with your friends, was to drive to Walmart. And then you'd walk around Walmart, and inevitably you would see other people who had driven to Walmart. It was like where people got together to hang out because it was open 24/7, and it was just a big place with lots of fluorescent lights. That's Walmart.
You know what's crazy though is that I did this exact same thing in high school.
That's wild. It's the great equalizer.
Well, I mean, in rural communities, it's definitely like, okay. I mean, in rural communities, there's a part in this book where it says, a town of 5,000 can support a Walmart, which is crazy. But it's interesting because like, a Walmart moves into a town, into a rural community, and like it will shut everything else down because no one else can compete with Walmart because it's a huge, extremely managed and efficient organization. And yeah, I mean, it replaces the town square. It replaces, having like a even fast food restaurant in your town. Because they'll put a Subway in there, they put a McDonald's in there, and it's all over for the rest of them. So it's just such a weird thing that Walmart becomes this like huge occupying force in rural America. There's even this interesting a quote that gets kind of echoed throughout the book that says, if you want to reach evangelical Christians on a Sunday, well, you got to reach them in church, but if you want to reach them on a Saturday, you got to go to Walmart. And boy, is that too painfully true.
Yeah, extremely true.
It sucks. Well, okay, so she starts the book off just kind of trying to explain how wild this place is. And I thought this was a good way that she does that. Walmart is the biggest company on the planet. Its sales on a single day top the gross domestic products of 36 sovereign nations. If it were the independent Republic of Walmart, it would be China's 6th largest export market, and its economy would rank 30th in the world, right behind Saudi Arabia's. And then the punchline. It's from a little town in the Ozark Mountains where you can't even buy beer. So the first part of Bethany Moreton's book here is trying to draw this paradox about Walmart. That on the one hand, it's this this extremely sophisticated company that uses all kinds of data to make its decisions, and it's always on the cutting edge of technology. But on the other hand, it's from like a place that that some might consider the backwoods, right? It's from Arkansas, it's from Missouri, it's in the Ozark Mountains. It has all these other connotations that kind of come along with it that are really interesting. So kind of riffing off this a little bit more, Bethany Moreton says, the paradox, marveled one commentator in 2002, is that Walmart stands for both Main Street values and the efficiencies of huge corporations. Aw shucks hokiness and terabytes of minute-by-minute sales data, fried chicken luncheons at the Walton's Arkansas home, and the demands of Wall Street. So Walmart is this wild cultural force and economic force in the world because it's where these two kind of things meet, like the weird Christian culture of the Ozarks, and also the intense striving for the accumulation of capital that you might see on Wall Street. It's this two weird worlds merging into one. And well, the way that it got that way is also pretty weird and surprising. Because sort of in the history of Walmart, you have a weird cultural shift that happens, and a lot of stuff with progressive politics, actually. I don't know, Dean, do you want to talk about that a little bit, or should I?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So there's kind of two pieces of this book. One is a history of Walmart, and even a political history of it. And the other is maybe like a thread that tries to figure out what Walmart means for us today or something like that. Yeah. And the history is really fascinating. So like Matt was just saying, it is kind of situated, or it comes out of this place that some people might look at as the backwards piece of the United States or something. But it gets even weirder. So Moreton says this: the megastore selected as its home the most inhospitable part of the country for big business, the very same rural southwestern counties that since the 1880s had fought against large corporations and for increased government safeguards in the nation's economy. She's talking about Arkansas in particular. Not only were these populous strongholds hostile to the distant capitalists of Eastern industry and finance, they were also lousy customers. The early 20th century's department stores and theme parks were creatures of the city, and their paying customers the beneficiaries of industrial profits and union wages. Placed next to this urban cornucopia, small towns and their rural trade areas look distinctly unpromising as the raw material of retail dominance. So that's kind of the backdrop, but she goes on to say the American periphery, or what she calls throughout the book Wal-Mart country, won the economic commanding heights in the second half of the century precisely by creatively mobilizing its regional disadvantages, turning necessity to invention, hostility to triumph. So that's the brief kind of story that she tells, but there's lots of moving parts in between.
Yeah, tons of moving parts. So we're talking about like the 1880s. And that, I guess, general time period. And, when you think about labor history and you think about radicalism in the United States and progressive politics, probably the last places that you're thinking of are Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, or Kansas, or even Texas, right? Those places are not sort of at the forefront of your mind. But one of the sort of interesting histories here that Bethany Moreton lays out is that those places exactly hosted some of the most, most vigorous popular protests that were against, huge economic corporations. So she says that the strikes and rebellions of 1886 that posed the nation's greatest collective challenge to industrial capitalism spread out of Sedalia, Missouri, the future home of early Wal-Marts. So that there's this, the kind of interesting part of this early story here is that these sort of rural places that you might not expect to be a hotbed for radical politics actually had some surprisingly progressive currents at some points, at least. And there was this sort of culture of, big business was bad. It wasn't going to do what the people of Arkansas and people of Missouri needed it to do because they were really poor. Plus, like the sort of culture that those types of department stores would import were things that did not really appeal to the, I don't know, like the culture of people in Arkansas or in Missouri, the sort of like East Coast fashions and stuff. Those types of department stores didn't play well with those populations. And kind of in response to this distrust of big business, there was this political movement that's pretty noteworthy called the People's Party. Generally, the People's Party is just kind of like a sort of progressive, left-wing, like agrarian type of movement that happened in this area. So Bethany Moreton writes, the People's Party national platform of 1896 vigorously charged the federal government with restoring the republic's financial and industrial independence usurped by corporate monopolies. So that's kind of like that's sort of the line of the party, is that it's against these corporate monopolies, and it was definitely like a left-leaning organization. The People's Party was interesting. It ended up being like a third party in the United States. They ran candidates, etc. They had some pretty surprising leftist ideas. They were pro-agrarian, pro-farmer, anti-monopoly. Some of the more left currents of the party were advocates for cooperatives, and even Eugene V. Debs was a supporter. So that's pretty noteworthy. It wasn't quite a socialist party, but it also wasn't not a socialist party for sure. After its failure to win elections, though, most of the party dissolved, even though some people kind of kept the banner waving, but not in a really meaningful way. But its constituencies either end up joining the Democrats or the Socialist Party. So it kind of spun out in those different directions. But the populism of the People's Party, or like that general energy of the region in like the 1880s, ends up being really important for Walmart. Well, I hate it. I hate that that's true,
know.
but it's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, the populism of the People's Party gets transformed into like a desire for like the region to thrive, but only on their terms, right? They don't want big businesses in there, but they do want economic development in the region. They want farmers cooperatives. That's like a big idea. And Walmart ends up cashing in on that sort of legacy in some interesting ways. Yeah, so the populist energy, like I said, it gets like rehabilitated into the desire for a local economic power that keeps larger corporations at bay. So it's kind of like it was kind of like a moment of like a populism of the region, and what it wanted was like regional sovereignty or something, in the sense that they didn't want the sort of big corporations from the East Coast coming to dominate their spot. Yeah, this is how Bethany Moreton puts it. Despite the dominant antipathy towards corporations, the area that would become Walmart country was also familiar with arguments supporting modern large-scale businesses, so long as they were operated by and for the farmers. The farm organizations that animated political debate in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri were friendly to new technologies of transportation and communication. Populist organizations justified demands upon the state to underwrite regional development and advocated keeping the money and local power. So there you have it. There's this type of populist energy. It's not anti-technology. It's not anti like corporations or anti-business. It's sort of anti-capitalist in some ways, but if the money stays in the region, then it's kind of chill. It's fine. So that's like an interesting undergirding. But then things get worse. Dean, do you want to talk about how that populism just gets super racist?
Yeah, right. So I guess this is maybe the sad decline or the sad turnaround in some ways into why you don't think all those places are like hotbeds of progressive energy these days. So to kind of fill that piece of the story out, Morton writes this. The geographic idiom implied that, in contrast to foreigners, locals were Christian, old stock American whites. It could therefore easily slide into racist scapegoating. At the time, clannishness proved uncomfortably compatible with the anti-chain movement. Father Charles Coughlin, he's a Catholic fascist priest, if you don't know who he is. She describes him as the radio demagogue who made defenses of the local merchant a central theme in his Depression-era broadcasts, moved on to full-throated anti-Semitism after 1938. A congressional committee even heard sensational and unsubstantiated charges that the National Anti-Chain Store League disseminated Nazi propaganda. The wife of a small grocer wrote to the Louisiana anti-chain radio station KWKX, or KH, that in her opinion, the future of independent industry was the most important question facing the Christian people of America. So, yeah, it's a really tragic tale of all of this energy that's coalescing around people saying, we want some kind of autonomy or a say in our own kind of communities. That becomes a huge, weird protectionist impulse that coalesces not around cooperation or any kind of semblance of class solidarity, but rather around race and being white, and in particular being white Christians in that area. So the geography is important, but it's tied to these other kinds of identities that even kind of override that initial claim. And that becomes basically the bedrock of Walmart's corporate culture and its philosophy, which I think is really wild. Like, the thing that Morton connects here is, and she says this explicitly, the chain that would become Walmart Stores Incorporated arose out of the populist tradition of farmers' cooperatives, which is like a sentence that if you told me completely outside of the study, I would never, ever believe it. I don't think I could understand it. But the way that she ties it together makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The sort of political history of the region, and how she kind of parses that out, its like development, and then how Walmart captures that energy in its culture is it's wild. It's wild, and I hate it. But it's a good example of the ways capitalism can kind of absorb any ideology and make it into capitalism.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, all of that. So the racist piece is important. The protectionist piece is important, and the fact that Walmart is able to find its way or find its niche in these kind of rural communities is also very important. But I think that, I mean, especially for our purposes in this evangelicalism theme, what becomes even weirder is that there are other kinds of like values or Christian values that are that play well to that crowd, right? Like the white protectionist crowd, white supremacist Christian crowd. There are other values that play to that crowd that Walmart then kind of like absorbs and repackages into its own managerial philosophy, essentially. Matt, do you want to introduce us to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only is Walmart sort of their corporate philosophy about this like sort of captured populist white supremacist energy, um, it's also has this like it appropriates a servant leadership kind of rhetoric from evangelicalism, and I don't know if you've ever been in, if you're not an evangelical yourself, and you're not super familiar with what that means. Well, it means that it means that the work ethic here is that like to be a servant is sort of like the best thing you can be. That's the whole thing. But servant leadership, when it's used in Christian contexts, especially evangelical ones, um, usually is cashing in on a certain understanding of gender as well. That men can be servant leaders for sure, but women are servant leaders because it's sort of part of their natural sort of way of being, right? As domestic workers, or that's what capitalism would have you believe. So Walmart, though, it uses that type of rhetoric, servant leadership, to create a corporate culture that capitalizes on the domestic labor and emotional labor of women in those spaces. And it's a pretty important piece of the story as well. So Bethany Moreton says that she's kind of citing throughout the book. I mean, she ends up citing some very funny sources, and one of them is a publication that Walmart puts out called Walmart World. So this
gotta
is
get my subscription.
Yeah, you gotta get your subscription to Walmart World. So Bethany Moreton writes, in the company newsletter Walmart World, management exhortations sought to abstract and inculcate the rather pre-capitalist values that early employees brought into the corporation. So this is just basically what we've been saying, right? Walmart captures those, I mean, not necessarily pre-capitalist values, but the values of the region, the sort of like folk expressions of religion and so on, and they bring them into the corporation. So then this is where the gendered aspect comes in, I guess. This is another quote from Moreton. She says, the family imagery that transferred from rural heartland to Walmart chain stores in the 1970s thus brought with it a variety of meanings. Natural adult male authority, mutuality, sociability, the subsistence of a risk. And since Walmart's early days, the same areas of the country that first welcomed Walmart have also become the champions of family values as the ruling metaphor for public life. And in the United States, at least, family values is an ideograph that is a signal for heterosexual marriages, complementarian type of idea of men and women, that sort of thing. So Walmart took those ideas about family values and what it meant to be a servant and like sort of like the natural male authority, and it put women into the equation as workers. And she goes on to say, adapting women's domestic labor into retail stores offered the new service workplace two distinct advantages. First, such labor was widely undervalued and therefore cheap, right? Women still don't make as much as men, but especially didn't then. And second, it incorporated customers themselves into service by way of their unpaid procurement of goods for families. Okay, so this part is a little bit mind-bending. This is where Bethany Moreton's book is like when it becomes this like really different type of history of Walmart.
Yeah.
It's not just a history of Walmart, but it's about like a history of the ways that like supermarkets worked in general. It's like this whole weird thing that I guess because I'm a millennial, I have no sort of access to and experience. But what Morton's saying here is that, okay, women are put in these situations of being, servant leaders. It's a service workplace and so on. But it's a department store that it is different than others at the time because okay, okay, imagine yourself in an old-timey department store.
I am.
Okay, you're there. So basically, in the old-timey department store, you'd walk up to a counter and you'd say, "Hey, I need a big barrel of Cheetos," and the person behind there'd be a person behind the counter, and they'd say, "Of course, one big barrel of Cheetos coming right up."
Yes, sir.
Of the finest Cheetos for you and your family. So then they would go get the Cheetos themselves, and then they would bring them to you at the desk, at the like sort of like, I don't know, kiosk or whatever it would be. So Walmart was different because instead of having like a bunch of different desks or whatever set up around the store, the customers just go get the things themselves, and like the other like predominantly female workforce is there to like help out if you need it or whatever. And like, I mean, for us modern users of Walmarts and department stores, this seems like absurd because of course you go get the groceries yourself. But for Walmart, this is a big innovation that they adopted from another supermarket chain called Piggly Wiggly, which is a good name, but a bad supermarket chain.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really wild thing to note, though, right? That she calls it a form of unpaid labor, that customers themselves become part of this kind of weird, bizarre idea of service, you know, that you're kind of brought into the the privilege of unpaid labor.
Yeah, you're brought into the privilege of unpaid labor. And then the employees on the other side are doing this other type of like undervalued labor. There are all these kind of interesting, like not quite ethnographic, but sort of ethnographic stories, where she'll have interviewed women who worked at Walmart in like the 80s or the 70s or whatever, and they're talking about like how they would interact with their customers, especially like in the ladies wear department. They would like always be like helping women find like clothes that suit them and all this kind of stuff. This like sort of like it's like women's work of finding other women clothes and that kind of thing, but like not really being paid to do that. They're just there as employees. So it's this way the job becomes like very gendered, but not like not by the rules necessarily, but just because of like they're hiring women and that's sort of their workplace culture. It's this wild thing.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy too because you can really draw a pretty clear line, I think, between Christian ideas of gender and work in general and those kinds of practices. And the more that I have thought about this, having read this book a little bit, is like the more I've thought about that, the more I've also thought about friends of mine who still work in these kinds of stores. I had a friend who worked at Target who was telling me they had like a huge managerial change not too long ago where they like fired all these people who kind of typically manage the floor, I guess. And what they were trying to encourage people to do was everyone was assigned to like one area of the store. So I don't know, maybe you're like electronics or your produce or whatever. And that was supposed to be your space. So you kind of are encouraged to take ownership of it. And that becomes like your spot. And it's such a crazy kind of continuation of this in a certain sense, right? That you're kind of cashing in on these preconceived ideas that are not just capitalist, right? Capitalist individualism or something like that. But there are also some Christian seeds to them, especially Christian capitalist seeds, right? Of like being proud in your own work and kind of being able to be judged by like your own specific labor and that sort of thing. And it's fascinating to kind of watch her piece this together so far back in the past. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so here's another quote from Moreton that kind of, I think, establishes this point a little bit more thoroughly. So this is at the very end of her section about service and gender. So she says this: "For when Walmart's hourly employees talked about their work, they did not automatically emphasize the elements that find ready parallels in manufacturing. Elements like surveillance, automation, anti-unionism, or supervisory authority. Rather, they stressed the one element of service work that distinguishes it from all others: the relationship between the service provider and the customer. They did not automatically claim the identity of worker, or indeed of woman. Their own preference was for a different cultural tradition, that of Christian service." So, kind of proving the point that workers at Walmart, the ones that she interviewed, sort of historical things she read, they don't think of themselves even as, workers in the same way someone like in manufacturing would. They think of themselves as, Christian servants. And boy, is that some bad ideology.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, this is all like some really wild stuff about kind of the internal Christian managerial side of Walmart. But another turn that the book takes is to talk about Walmart and the Walton family and its ties to a really crazy, a really fascinating kind of Christian anti-communist political involvement. It would be the polite way of saying it. Political intervention in global politics, explicitly done in an anti-communist and pro-Christian way on the part of Walmart. So if all of that is the managerial or sort of inside the store side of things, the other story she tells is what happens with the rest of that money and how do they influence culture. So maybe we can just turn to that for the last bit of the show here, because I think it's really wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me make one more quick point though too. Sorry.
Yeah.
I want to get to that too. That there's this like inside the store managerial aspect of like the Christian free enterprise vibe, but the Walton family does end up like affecting United States culture in a ton of other ways, especially when it comes to Christian higher ed. They have like tendrils throughout the Midwest in Christian higher ed institutions. So just want to throw that out there, that there's like also this whole other aspect of it too that we can't even talk about, but like you gotta read this dang book. Okay.
Well, that will come back actually, because it's an important piece of political activity. Yeah. So we'll get to that in a minute. The story that she tells is mostly like the 70s, 80s, and then the 90s. So the kind of height of the Cold War, but then the collapse of communism too. Both of these are really defining for how the Waltons understand themselves in the world, understand their business and their faith. So here's a really wild couple of paragraphs. So she writes this. The Washington Consensus functioned as the hardware of economic restructuring in the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, conservative Christians took up the cause of anti-communism in Central America with new fervor in the 70s and 80s. As the Reagan administration funded right-wing counterinsurgencies in El Salvador and Guatemala and sought to overturn the Sandinista victory in Nicaragua, it had no better stateside allies than religious conservatives. Hundreds of tons of material aid went directly to the Contra rebels from mainstream evangelical organizations like the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, Gospel Crusade, World Vision, and the National Association of Evangelicals. The Christian Broadcasting Network raised money for Guatemala's right-wing dictator, even as he presided over the slaughter of tens of thousands of civilians. Christian student organizations like Campus Crusade for Christ energetically countered the growing opposition to Reagan's Central American policies. The White House Office of Public Diplomacy, staffed by psychological warfare efforts from the Army and the CIA, coordinated a multi-million-dollar PR campaign to define the terms of public discussion on Central America policy. So this is the world in which the Waltons are thinking about what to do with their money. And here is where they come up with a really fascinating, really troubling innovation. And this will bring in some of the higher ed piece. So she says, against this backdrop, the intersecting lives of a Nicaraguan student, an Oklahoma journalist, and an Arkansas merchant sketch a web of relationships between people and institutions that shadowed the Washington Consensus, a private sector Bentonville Consensus, a software of globalization. All those terms make more sense in the context of the book, but she's kind of drawing together like a homology between like these political Cold War ideas and certain evangelical trends, or in the development of Christian higher ed. So she says, through a Walton Family Foundation program, this human network bridged the transition from the last Cold War proxy battles to the new frontier of hemispheric free trade in the 1990s. It was not part of the coordinated Christian and neoconservative campaign of direct aid to anti-communists, but rather a parallel incubator of pro-market Christians. When the devastation of the 1980s ground down, taking with it 300,000 civilian lives at the hands of U.S.-backed regimes in Central America, the Bentonville Consensus helped fill the vacuum. For the grateful students involved, the scholarships offered a rare chance at economic security and broadened options for their entire families. For Walmart and its suppliers, the program yielded a network of bilingual, bicultural potential managers throughout Mexico and Central America, just as the free trade agreements the companies had long sought were encouraging new outposts for American corporations after the Cold War. So this is really like the tying together of Walmart's desire to not only take advantage of the sort of Christian culture in Arkansas and elsewhere in the United States, but to reproduce that Christian culture so that they could reproduce Walmarts in other parts of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that crazy? It's so wild that things like World Vision or Campus Crusade for Christ actually still exist. They're not gone. They're not gone, and you got to imagine that whole situation isn't over. It's so wild because I don't know. You wonder why evangelicalism and Christianity has such a conservative bent to it, and it's because someone has spent a lot of money making it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
And that should be obvious, but
yeah,
it's not for some reason. I didn't think about it until I read this book.
Yeah, it's cloaked in ideology, right? Like you think those things because you read the Bible, but in fact you think those things because someone paid a lot of money to make people read the Bible that way.
Yeah, totally. So if someone would just give us that much money, we could change everything.
That's right.
We'll do a complete rebrand here.
We need lefty Waltons was what we need, or the Engleses of Christian leftism.
Yeah, in the episode of Know Your Enemy where they talked about the Kochs, a common refrain in that episode is that like, man, the left should just really learn from these people. The left should learn from these people with their dark money and influences of power, and they should learn how to do this. And I'm kind of convinced that's probably true.
Yeah, it's too bad we're all poor. Yeah. Well, what else is crazy about this though is what Moreton is trying to do is say, all right, so you have all these people like Campus Crusade, the evangelical business guys, all these folks getting together and like actively supplying material aid to like right-wing death squads in Central America. She says, all right, Walmart isn't necessarily doing that. The Waltons aren't doing that. Instead, what they're doing is producing pro-market kinds of Christians. It's the sort of soft power approach that happens after the United States starts to come under some more scrutiny for doing those kinds of things. But don't be deceived. It's not because they're just kind of like, I don't know, innocent, naive people who just want like Christians to work at their company or whatever. The anti-communist thing is still a piece of it. And it goes hand in hand with the Reagan administration. So she spells it out like this. She says, in 1985, President Reagan's National Bipartisan Commission on Central America, better known as the Kissinger Commission, issued a report calling for private donors to fund closer educational ties to the region in Central America. Too many young Central Americans, it warned, were imbibing communism while studying in Cuba or the Soviet Union. Can you imagine? The first respondent to this challenge was the founding family of Wal-Mart Stores, Inc., Sam and Helen Walton, who established 4-year scholarships to educate young Central Americans in free enterprise at a trio of Christian colleges in Wal-Mart's home state of Arkansas, offering the following explanation. So this is what they say. The purpose of the program is to expose students from Central America to the benefits of a society and an economy that flourish under a free, open, elected government. Reports show that several thousand Central Americans are studying on scholarships in communist bloc countries. Sam Walton commented, if we want future leaders of Central America to know the benefits of a free society, we need to get large numbers of the student generation up here to the United States. So it is a coordinated effort to drive these students and to find students, like actively recruit students, which they usually did through like church networks and that sort of thing, and bring them to the United States, specifically to these 3 Christian colleges in Arkansas, in order to stop them from going to the Soviet Union or Cuba and suddenly discovering the joys of communism.
Yikes. Yeah. Again, it's not just like naturally happening. It's a concerted effort by very rich capitalists. Huh.
It's wild though, because it's like also roping in Christian higher ed, right, who are willing partners in having new students for free enterprise from other parts of the world.
Right.
And it's wild. Like there's so many pieces here, right? There's conservative foreign policy agenda, right? Like they're actively being inspired by Reagan and Kissinger. There's a Christian higher ed piece of this that is coming together. There's the whole point for them also materially is to be able to train people who are capable of basically managing future Walmarts in Central America and Spanish-speaking countries. So the capitalist interest is there. All of it is like tied in this really, really bizarre kind of way.
And you know, something that's really damning about this whole thing, I mean, okay, it's all very damning. It's like, it's all explicitly bad and icky and extremely gross. But something that I think is even, I mean, maybe more fascinating is that that the Waltons themselves are not evangelicals. That I guess that seems interesting to me because you would think that if you were going to go through all of this, you know, if you're going to build a corporate culture that is, you know, based off of a real type of complementarian understanding of gender, and you're going to go and you're going to use evangelical networks to recruit students to conservative Christian colleges, right? You think that at least you would probably believe in that type of thing. But what's even crazier is that Sam Walton was a Presbyterian. He was a mainline Protestant, and there's a part in the book that kind of describes his particular type of Christianity, and this is what it is. It's like the pastor from his church was like, well, when it's not hunting season, Sam's in church, and like that's it, and like that's sort of like the whole of his religious characteristics. And like I guess what's so I mean, to me, I read that, and like I'm sure Sam Walton is a very conservative Christian or whatever, but it's wild that he's not like a part of the, you know, evangelical, like he's not a part of an explicit evangelical community outside of his business relationships. I think that's super interesting. I guess to me, it just like, it sounds like a real big opiate of the masses kind of situation where like Sam Walton and Walmart Corporation, like they see this huge network, this huge global network that's been set up by I mean, other powerful business people, but also, you know, through the soft power of churches in other countries. And it's like, well, I guess that's a great way to get our work done. And it's so nihilistic and just disgusting. Like what a terrible way to use religion against people to create a political economy that serves your ends specifically.
Yeah, it's wild too, because in so much of American imperialism, it's just really obvious, you know, supporting like this violent group, fighting that other violent group so that American interests could be represented in a particular place. But what's really fascinating about the Waltons case is they perform imperialism in a different kind of way, where they're not like trying to get blood on their hands or anything. They're trying to export evangelicalism so that they can export Walmart in this really weird sense. And the Presbyterianism isn't completely left behind, but that makes it even weirder. So just to add another piece of the puzzle here, Morton says this. She's talking about the 3 different colleges that I mentioned earlier. I forget all their names, but it's not important right now. She says this: into these 3 distinct traditions of American Protestantism, which she says are frontier Presbyterianism, non-denominational evangelicalism, and hard right fundamentalism. Those are the 3 traditions that these colleges come out of. The Waltons brought young people from what Reagan's ambassador Gene Kilpatrick had recently proclaimed the most important place in the world. In the small towns of the Arkansas Ozarks, the Walmart family began to offer these students undergraduate degrees in business, marketing, and communications, the better to combat communism and build free market democracies. As Sam Walton put it, the Arkansas schools recommended themselves because we thought we could stay close to them, we know what they teach and how they think. 60 new students a year at each Christian campus, majoring primarily in business-related subjects, found themselves defining a new category of the globalized, a transient, white-collar, class conversant with Protestant evangelicalism and service sector office culture employed by U.S.-based multinational corporations. Moreover, their presence in the Ozarks presaged the region's own growing awareness of its hemispheric context, Drawn by jobs in construction and chicken processing, pushed by the calamitous effect of repression and economic restructuring in their home countries, a steady stream of Mexican and Central American newcomers poured into Northwest Arkansas in the 1990s. Two peripheries met along paths worn by war, work, and worship.
Nope. No, I don't like this, Dean. This is not the good news.
It's the bad news, the nega gospel.
Yeah, it is. So, okay, we're getting close to an hour here. I think there's a lot of big ideas that we can draw out here, and we've said them. We've said a few of them, right? That evangelicalism and its conservatism doesn't happen by accident, right? It's a thing that's created by big businesses to produce the types of cultural contexts that they can thrive in, and that is really important. It's also important to note kind of the ways that evangelicalism is used pretty technologically here to funnel folks from Central America and bring them to Christian universities and colleges and turn them into business people. It's just such a crazy story because I don't know, it takes things. It just takes things like I mean, I guess it's upsetting for me particularly as a person who teaches at a Christian university, who I don't think has any money or relationship to Walmart. But then again, what do I know? It takes something that could be not so bad, right? Like Christian education isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it does transform it into something that is necessarily terrible. And I don't know. Shame on those Christians. Shame on us for letting it happen. I don't know. It's bad.
Yeah, well, and especially like in the context of the 90s, I think it's important too to just add the political economy piece here, right? That what the Waltons are doing is they're preying on people who feel economically disadvantaged, who are economically disadvantaged because of free trade agreements coming after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yep.
So they're taking those people, bringing them to the United States, turning them into a weird evangelical kind of bourgeois class that is... for all intents and purposes, essentially an agent of American imperialism encouraged to return back to their home countries and continue the work there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really, really horrifying way of cynically using Christianity in order to accomplish American imperialism.
Man, putting it in terms of political economy is so much more depressing and insidious, I think, too, right? Okay, for example, the response to NAFTA by some people who were disenfranchised in Mexico and Chiapas, right, led to the Zapatistas,
Right.
A community that worked on creating a sort of self-sufficient community for indigenous people in the southern part of Mexico. Okay, that's one response. The second response is the imperialist response is trying to funnel people from Central and Latin America into the United States and reproduce capitalism, right? It's like this weird anti-Zapatista movement, right? It's like it's the nega Zapatistas. It's like you could just call it imperialism or the reinforcing of like United States empire, or however we want to parse that out, I guess explicitly. But I don't know. It's interesting to see how think about it in those political economy terms. It's good.
Yeah, well, I think if we kind of double back to like why this is important in the context of the other conversations we've had so far, it's not just because like this is a weird book that we found, although it is that for sure. It's also like evangelicalism is certainly a way that influences how people think, but it is a material force in the world that makes sense in capitalist economies. In fact, in Latin America, for instance, lots of liberation theologians are often complaining about how like the United States is exporting all these evangelicals and they can't activate the kind of revolutionary rhetoric that they were able to activate in the 60s and 70s. It just doesn't land on evangelicals, right? They're too ready to be employees at Walmart and not ready to be resisting U.S. imperialism. And I think it's important, especially for Christians in the U.S. And elsewhere, but especially in the U.S., just to be giving thought to whether you're an evangelical or not, like giving thought to how that particular kind of Christianity licenses, perpetuates, and even prepares the ground for American capitalism around the world.
I think it's a good final note. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you don't, right? This one, you don't like what you heard. It's a lot of bad news.
But you like that we had to read it and you didn't.
That's okay. If you like that part of it, you could support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/the Magnificast. We promise that we're not using any of that money to spread imperialistic forms of Christianity around the world. We're just using it to do something different. I promise. Cool. If you can't do that, that's totally chill. You can go on iTunes and give us a review, and that would be very nice as well. Those reviews, also not imperialistic. Cool. Yeah, our intro music is by Mario Armstrong, and our outro music is, as always, by The Illogical Spoon. And we'll see you next week with some more of this wild evangelical history.
Get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early.